Have quite an exceptional presentation this evening, I think. Dr. Dawn Jackson is somebody I've known for years, and she has had a very strong interest in meditation, other forms of consciousness work, and recently channeled that interest into work that was being done at the pain clinic on fibromyalgia. And so she's here tonight to report on a study that was conducted at the University Pain Clinic for people with fibromyalgia. I think it was in about 1972 or 73 that Herbert Benson, working at Harvard Medical School, had a PhD student by the name of Keith Wallace. And together, they did a study with people who were practicing meditation technique and found that even beginning meditators practicing for a fairly short period of time were able to display a significant decrease in the physiological parameters related to the fight or flight response, which is coincidental with the stress response. That a person who's meditating finds that their blood pressure, their heartbeat, their oxygen consumption, all of these indicators of stress start to reduce. And it was out of Harvard at that time that they coined the phrase, the relaxation response. What we found in the last 10 to 15 years of researching fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue is that being able to enhance the relaxation response correlates with reduced symptoms and improved sense of vitality. So I hope that tonight's speech gives you some sense of one aspect of this, and Dawn, I think, is going to take questions afterwards, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about meditation in a broader sense. But without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Dawn Jackson.
Stuart. I'm glad Stuart was here to give the introduction because he has had so much experience with the specific technique that he was talking about with Herbert Benson, and so it gives me a perfect way to bring the information to you about what we did at the Pain Center. I was lucky enough to be a part of the study with Yoshi Nakamura and with Dave Vago, and they had been very interested in how these various meditation techniques could maybe help people with chronic pain. And what Stuart's passing out for you are just my notes that I'm speaking from, so that you can hang on to them if you want to refer to them a little later. But the study that, sure, can't. Does it, it's not, are you picking up now? Is that good? Can you hear it? Okay, how does that sound? Okay, better. So the study was based on a similar technique to what Stuart was mentioning, called mindfulness-based stress reduction. And they used an 8-week period of time to talk with women who had fibromyalgia, to work with women who had fibromyalgia, and to help them learn this kind of meditation technique, and then did a whole variety of different kinds of assessments to see if they noticed any different in their cognitive functioning, in the way they were feeling, their emotional responses. And they also had a very extensive self-report measure, so all the participants would daily and weekly be checking in with the Pain Center through the website to report what they were experiencing. So they had this amazing amount of material that they were collecting over a period of time. And my part in it was to be a part of the study. I got to talk with all the participants both during the study and then afterwards, and we did a qualitative analysis of what their experience was. So what I'm sharing with you tonight are the results of what all the participants' experience of this study was. So, first question that came up for most of the participants is what I listed here is just what is mindfulness? And I don't know if many of you have anybody done any meditation experience? So you may have, some of this may be familiar with you, or what the meditation that Stuart was mentioning is another kind of meditation, but this particular meditation was based on the work of a man named Jon Kabat-Zinn, who started a program about 20 years ago at UMass, working with people with chronic illness, and he used a type of meditation called mindfulness or insight-based meditation. And I like his term for how he described mindfulness is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. That kind of encompasses a lot, but in a very short way, talking about what mindfulness is. And that work that he did at UMass really helped kind of shift a way of understanding the way chronic pain was being handled for a variety of different programs across the United States. And so when the folks at the Pain Center were trying to figure out what they were going to study, and they were interested in this particular type of work with mindfulness, they chose his work as a basis for creating this 8-week program. So it's the insight meditation, and the Buddhist texts refer to this practice as a way of reducing suffering. It's an ancient technique that also helps increase awareness and really helps people to understand themselves a little better and have some compassion for themselves. So that was part of the reason that that particular type of meditation was chosen for the study. And the 4 foundations of that kind of meditation are an observation of the body. So there was a lot of focus on bodily awareness, which for chronic fatigue and for fibromyalgia was the first time that it has ever been studied in this way. Also the feelings or the emotions that people experienced when they were doing the meditation. There was an increased observation in their consciousness level, and then just simply watching their thoughts or images. So the work that I mentioned a little earlier that I did was just simply a transcription analysis of all the work that happened during the 8 weeks, what the participants were experiencing, and then we did about an hour and a half an hour and a half interview afterwards, and I transcribed those, and then we came up with a collection of the themes that they experienced. So that's what I'm going to be specifically sharing with you right now. Are there any questions, though, up to this point about the study, what mindfulness is, what any of... okay. So, oh, yeah.
They were given specific training.
Yes, we had it. It was 8 weeks, and we met once a week. Thank you for asking for that clarification. We met once a week, and they actually just took a meditation course. And we meditated together. They then would practice their meditation every day and report back either by phone or by the internet about what their experience was, and their experiences of everything from how they were feeling physically, what they were experiencing in their emotional regulation. And then they would come in and take tests that showed whether their cognitive capacities were shifting. So it was a very intense 8 weeks for the participants, but it was a typical meditation course for this kind of meditation. Oh, for the meditation? Well, what the participants agreed to do is meditate every day. So they would meditate for a half an hour to 45 minutes every day. And then the course itself, the meditation class, was probably about 2 hours. Yeah, for the class. And on the back, I'll talk a little bit later about just a couple ideas of, if you're interested in meditation, where some people who are offering that meditation classes. Okay. So some of the characteristics that were very interesting to the people who were doing this research, that was very specific, we think, to people who were suffering from fibromyalgia, is that was unique. The first one was that there tended to be a lot of discussion about the intensity of the feeling that they had about feeling victim to the disease, and it was one of the hardest and most painful parts from the first part of the experience. This feeling of I can't shift out of this, and that thought process was one of the things that was quite remarkably shifted toward the end of the study, toward the end of the class or the course. Another major characteristic was that most of the participants really had a very strong tendency to be really identified as caregivers. So they had given and given and given to others in their lives, but had a very hard time taking care of themselves. And they also tended to be very highly responsible. And that was something that was unanticipated in the initial work with the fibromyalgia participants. It was a new finding that they weren't expecting. I think the saddest, the most difficult for me as someone who hadn't worked with many people with fibromyalgia is how frustrating it was for the participants about feeling misunderstood by the medical community, feeling misunderstood by the study participants. So for example, when we were teaching the meditation class, everyone in most meditation practices, you sit. That's one of the ways that they teach meditation. And if you went to the Zen Center, for example, you would learn how to sit upright and erect. And the fibromyalgia participants, it was very uncomfortable to sit for a long period of time. So this was very hard for the meditation teacher to kind of accommodate that. And we ended up having everybody sprawling out on the floor with knees bent and pillows everywhere so that they could really feel very comfortable in their bodies as they were learning to meditate. So it was one of the things that was unanticipated, that, oh boy, we aren't going to be doing sitting meditation, we're going to be doing a different kind of meditation to accommodate the experience of the participants. It was also fascinating to me to find that so many of the participants had a really significant loss, either right during the time that we were doing the course or prior to it. I mean, there were several suicides among family members, or significant loss of through car accidents, or some major event that was quite striking, and that was one of the findings that I found particularly unique to this population. I think that there was also a big tendency to be, very tough on themselves. They had to do the meditation right, very perfectionistic, and so there was a lot of self-criticism that came up in the course that was addressed. And this isn't unusual. I think in our culture we have a tendency to be pretty tough on ourselves, but it was one of the things we talked a lot about. So those are some of the characteristics that came up in the group. I don't know if any of them ring true to any of your own experience, or if you have any thoughts or questions about that part of the results. Did anything sound kind of familiar to you? Nodding. Pretty standard, yeah. So those characteristics, you could click them off and say, yep, got that down, okay. Whoops, excuse me. So yeah.
I'm sorry, I do have a question. During the 8-week course, you're saying that people were experiencing the loss of loved ones?
Both prior to the course and then during, there was quite a lot of trauma that happened during the course. And it was very interesting because what the participants were able to say is if this had happened and I hadn't had this new coping strategy through the meditation, this would have been a lot harder for me to handle. But I was struck by how they were very significant losses.
How many people were in the study?
Initially, there were 18 or 20 from the very beginning, and then several dropped out, and toward the end, we had 10 who actually completed this part of the study, where we did the qualitative section.
You had the 2 hours training at the beginning, and then you managed week.
Mhm.
And was there additional training there?
Well, each week, the course itself was 2 hours a week, and then there was one day where there was a full day of a silent meditation, which would have been also similar to what a mindfulness-based stress reduction class includes. Did that answer your question?
So there were, every week there was 2 hour session.
Yes, that's right.
Training.
Yeah, basically we got together, and Shirley Ray, who was the teacher, we would meditate for 2 or 3 segments of meditation, then there would be discussion and sharing of what the experience was like, sharing about what it was like to meditate over the week, questions that people had about their experiences. So here were the themes that came up that we found that, and the way the qualitative study's done, let me give you a little bit of background on that, is that all of the transcripts of the course, or then their interviews, I transcribed all that data and then collected them into clumps of information that kind of coalesced into these key themes. And I gave you several examples of those, the kinds of statements that people said. So for example, one of the things that was quite stunning about this study, and I think in some ways initially some of the participants were disappointed, but in the sense that they actually didn't feel a shift in their experience of pain. And many of them were hoping that they would have a shift in that. But what the shift that was quite remarkable, and all of them talked about it quite extensively, is my pain isn't any different. And then there would be always this hesitation and a puzzling, kind of almost mysterious response. But I feel differently about pain. I feel differently about myself and the way I experience pain. So the relationship to pain and the way they were experiencing it was quite dramatically different. So, for example, someone would say, I have very different ways of coping. I can calm myself. Even if the pain is not better, I understand that it's transitory. And so that, for example, that was a common experience. This is transitory. I don't have to hold on to that. And the relief that would come through the meditation process seemed to shift their experience of pain. That's just one example. So that was quite a significant finding. I think the study researchers were really surprised that they thought that people were going to experience a significant diminishment in the pain, but it was their relationship and experience of the pain itself that shifted quite amazingly. I like to quote that it was like a nice brain cleanse. The things that were really positive also was that there were there were many symptom reductions. So for example, sleep, which was such a challenge for so many of the participants, most of them had a shift in the way they were able to sleep much better. Anxiety was reduced, their experience of depression also, and then they really noticed an increase in their energy. So that was another positive finding for most of them. Felt calmer, more organized, able to get through the day, and things that might normally feel much more debilitating, they felt by the end of the course felt better about. Emotional regulation, that they could begin to notice the link between the way they thought about things and the way they felt, so that people would say, gee, I normally would get upset with my husband, or I might get upset with my boss, but I'm noticing that I'm able to step back and watch myself. There's sort of an observer quality to a lot of meditation practices, to be able to witness what's happening, and that experience seemed to really help everyone feel much better about their capacity to deal with emotions that might have felt in the past might have been very difficult for them, especially when they were feeling so not so great. So they noticed that even if they weren't feeling really well, that they still could handle emotional ups and downs in a different way. A lot of the participants talked about how their family members and their coworkers, if they were working, really noticed that things were better. The increased sense of self-efficacy, what the key issue around that was, I really am able to be in charge of what's happening inside my head, the way I'm thinking about things. So that piece that I mentioned earlier, the feeling of being victimized, that was so uncomfortable and distasteful for so many of the participants. Once the experience of learning to watch the thoughts in a way that they could feel better in control of how they were thinking about their lives and how they were thinking about themselves, that made them feel much better about who they were in the world. And so their sense of self was really was profoundly affected by that. So that's one of the examples of what I'm talking about under increased sense of self-efficacy. Their understanding of their identity, like there were again and again, people would say, I'm not my pain, I'm not my story, I'm not my thoughts. And that was quite a shift for many of them if they hadn't had that awareness of being so identified with like a repetition of a story that was so uncomfortable or painful or really debilitating for them that, I can step back from that and not feel that that is who I am. I'm different from that story. One of the most important things that most of the participants reported, and it was hard for them to talk about, how often they didn't take care of themselves. So there was a continual discussion about, I know I feel better when I meditate. And then there would be the but. And the but would, but I have my kids, I have my family, and that awareness that they tended to put themselves last. And so there was quite a shift, because during the course of the meditation, they'd committed to meditating every day, and they'd committed to reporting back, and they'd committed to coming to the class, so that they really had to take care of themselves. And they were noticing how different that was, and how hard it was for them to take time out for themselves, and how good it felt to do that. So that was quite an important finding, and very difficult for most of them to do. Most of them felt worried about what was going to happen after the course. Oh, well, I'll slip back into my old ways, So that was an important, and one of the most important things that they learned, and also one of the things that was hardest for them to know, that they were going to have to shift to take care of themselves. Things like, gee, it really is okay for me to rest. It is okay for me to take time for myself. It's okay for me to slow down. There's nothing wrong with me taking care of myself in that way. So I think if I were going to try to sum up what most of the participants who've completed the study found, is that through the process of meditation, and we're going to try a little bit of it tonight so that you can just kind of get a feeling of a little sense of meditation if you haven't meditated before, but the awareness, an increased awareness of their capacity to understand that they could become a witness to their experience, in the sense that I keep doing like this. I notice standing back from themselves and saying, that is just a thought. So the kind of escalating thoughts that would tend to come up when there might be a particularly bad week, the thought pattern might, I'm sure you could all repeat any number of these thought patterns and it would be exactly similar to what these participants were saying, but there would be a bad week and I'm exhausted, I'm in such pain, this will never end. I'll never be able to do, that terrible downward spiral of thought patterns that can happen when there's a stuckness or a downward spiral, that they were able to notice that that was happening and say, oh, wait a minute, that's just a thought. I am separate from that. I am not that. And I think that was one of the most repeatedly powerful experiences that most of the participants talked about when they took the course. So that's kind of a sum up of what we found. What kind of questions? Yeah.
Do you know how many of the participants also have chronic fatigue syndrome?
There were quite a few that had both chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. I think most did. There were maybe one or two who, it was a minority who had only fibromyalgia. I'm curious what your responses or your thoughts are about hearing the results of the study. Yeah.
I get all excited. Sorry, I'm not.
What excites you?
I found that I had real identity issues when I was diagnosed finally.
Mm-hmm.
And also with what I do for a living. I was unable to do things that were important to me.
Mm.
Earning an income, meeting clients, being a better house cleaner, being a better parent, because I was never given permission as a child to do things that were self-healing or self-care. I was always rewarded for doing something that was related to hard work, scrubbing the floor, cleaning windows. There's always something to do. Gee, Mom, I'm bored. Well, you could go wash those windows. Yeah. My mom never said, well, hey, why don't you grab the fingernail polish and we'll, paint our nails or something. It was never anything fun. It was always something directly affiliated with production.
That could be a quote right out of the transcripts. That notion of I am what I do rather than I am. Yeah, I'm a human being. That doing versus being, that conversation came up all the time. And because of the being forced to hold back, being forced to have to cut back on all of those doings, the checkoff list was really shattering for many of the participants. And that's an example of the identity, being identified with doing rather than simply identified with being, and that is enough.
How many of us, even now, give our children permission to do something fun and enjoyable?
Mm-hmm. It's certainly something that we're very much a part of in our culture, isn't that true? I think one of the things that was stressed so much in the course and in most meditation practices is, and it's quite different actually in the Tibetan practice versus the way the Westerners tend to experience meditation, is that Westerners tend to be a lot more hard on themselves. That there's a greater need to have self-compassion. I remember hearing there's somebody I mentioned in my reference list, Pema Chodron. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her, but she's a Tibetan, a Buddhist nun who does beautiful work in teaching meditation and writing, and her books are quite wonderful. And she talks about how the Tibetans were confused by why she kept trying to talk about how important it was for us to have compassion for ourselves, to play. And they were just confused by that because they didn't have that as a part of their culture. They weren't nearly so tough on themselves as we are. And so one of the great gifts she brought to, as an American Buddhist nun, in teaching meditation is that you learn to have compassion for yourself. So one of the things that we worked on in the course is as people were learning meditation, inevitably the thoughts will come up, well, I'm not doing this right, or oh, I'm not a good meditator, or I'm bad at this, or all of these terrible self-talks, and to learn that we just, we're human. And so as you're watching your thoughts or you're watching the breath and the thought comes up, I'm lousy at this, that you have compassion for yourself. No, I'm just learning to come back to my breath. I'm learning to come back to the meditation practice. But that's a really good point that came up again and again during the course. Yeah.
I don't imagine very many people here are retired, but having a full-time job and forcing yourself through the day, coming home exhausted, you tended to be able to let things go because you were just too fatigued to do anything else. Now in retirement, you have the privilege of slowing down, and your body slows down, but your mind doesn't. Did you find that people in your study, were there any in there that were just having trouble because you want to slow down, because your body really does do better if you don't push it quite so hard and you kind of go with the flow? But what about slowing your mind? I find that I laugh at myself because I'll be sitting at my computer doing something, listening to an audiobook, and I've got the TV on. And I'm doing the
Only those things.
But I'm going from one thing to the other, and I can still relate to everything I'm doing. And I think, why am I?
Yeah.
I've got, and so when I try to slow down to meditate or to just come out of that, I find I almost get a grip in my throat that just makes me go, oh, I can't slow down like this.
Yeah, we're
Because
so
like this
used
gal
to
said,
that.
the work ethic in my home was extreme. We had to survive. It was a single mom home for a long time, and then we just learned as kids we just work. And so coming out of that, and 5 years later after retirement, still suffering with that. But I think there are a lot of people here who maybe aren't retired who still, their minds are going so fast that
It takes practice, doesn't it?
there's a lot of guilt
Mhm.
because you're not doing enough and you're letting go of things that you've maybe committed to do or you feel you're capable of doing, but when you start to do them, your energy goes. Does the meditation help with that?
Certainly does, and it is a common concern for people when they begin to meditate, that I often will hear people say, I can't slow down. I can't slow my thoughts down. And over time with practice, we can. And part of what we begin to, like working a muscle, it's learning a new neural pathway of really learning how to slow down to a place where you can experience being in your body and experience that and then there will be times where the thoughts will race, but you also can witness yourself in the racing thoughts and come back with, hopefully with compassion, so that you can settle.
I think you feel like maybe you're going to miss out on something. And so just keep them going, keep up with it. If you can't do it physically, do it mentally. And that, I guess maybe I need counseling instead of meditation. Thank you.
Yeah, your point though is a very interesting one, that we have the tendency to think we're going to miss out on something, when in reality, when we have 5 or 6 or 7 things going on at once, we're missing out on really what's happening right now here, being present with what's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here. I want to stop the craziness.
Sure.
Some of you who know the research on chronic fatigue syndrome is that one of the most consistently effective things that people can do with CFS is to adopt pacing strategies. They all have the effect of trying to balance activity with rest, and trying to gauge activity to our actual energy levels. It's very difficult to do this as a person who has had CFS and as a psychologist who works with people to try and encourage them. Why is it so difficult? It's because our mind is really the propeller of our experience, even as our bodies are slowing down, our minds are, I want to do this, I want to do this, you know. It beckons, it tempts, it pulls us. And I think that most of the people who I work with that have CFS at some point come to the recognition that the illness isn't going to improve as long as their mind is out of control.
Well said. Yeah.
I've tried to meditate for many years, and it's always been difficult for me because I'm trying to pace myself like Dr. Bircher says, and so I'm in the middle of something that's like, okay, no, it's time for rest. And I know intellectually that's what I need to do. And then I'll feel better, and I'll have more energy to come back to what I was doing. But I find myself going in, and I lay down, or get in a recliner chair and get control. And I find myself going, okay, relax, relax now.
The whip.
So you can hurry and get back.
Yeah. It's
I'd like the one who said relax now.
relax. Relax, you're not doing this right.
Yeah.
And one thing I found that really helped was to do some breathing exercises before the medication. Because the breathing would force me
Wonderful.
to focus on something different. Everything would kind of slow down physically, and then I could relax and meditate a lot easier if I did breathing first.
Wonderful.
I have a couple of thoughts. I want to thank you because you're reaffirming some of the things I've been learning, especially that it's okay to be tired, to make a mistake. And I found that my depression will hit and if I look back, it's because I made what I saw as a mistake, and that just started me pounding on myself. But I want to know if I don't seem to pursue things that seem to work. I mean, they work for a while, and then I kind of let them drift away. Did you find a lot of that in the group?
Well, what we found was the reason the 8 to 10 week course was set is that in research with other meditation programs, that it was really important to have a long enough period of time where people could learn the experience and also have enough benefit that they could then try to sustain it after the course itself. So I think that it is hard for all of us to sometimes, you know, we all know we feel better when we exercise, when we eat well, when we take care of ourselves, but it is one of those curious things that we tend to neglect ourselves sometimes, especially if we have the list of all those to-dos that we need to do to feel good about ourselves, and they include taking care of others rather than taking care of ourselves. So there is the practice of meditation does require discipline to learn certain of the techniques that help you achieve a beneficial result. So although you can feel it right away, we all notice if we just settle down and take a deep breath, we feel better. In fact, if you want, we could just experience, we won't do a long meditation, but we could just try what I found be very helpful, called a three-minute breathing practice. And if you want, we could just try it. You want to try it right now? And this one is used we didn't use this particular one because I wanted to just bring you something that we could just try right now in a shorter period of time, but it comes from, again, the same mindfulness concept. And this practice was used in another study that was done with people learning mindfulness techniques who have had recurring depression. And so this is based on a program called Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy. And the people that I worked with to learn this very simple technique, they found that sometimes people wouldn't practice meditation for 20 or 30 minutes a day, but if they could do just 3 minutes, And maybe 3 minutes 2 or 3 times a day, it was certainly better than nothing. Now you're going to certainly get a greater benefit with a longer period of time, but just this practice can certainly be helpful. So let's just try it. So find yourself in your chairs, and I know that this isn't, for 3 minutes, this is okay. At home you can find different ways to get really comfortable when you're doing meditation if you want to learn that. But for right now, just get as comfortable as you can in those chairs. And it helps to just close your eyes. And the first thing you're going to just begin to notice is just where you are, noticing arriving here in your body right now. And in that noticing, check in with your senses, all your senses. So starting with your mouth, what are you noticing in your mouth? Is there a taste? Is it dry or wet? How does the tongue feel in your mouth? What are you hearing? The sound of the noise in the room. Maybe the sound of your own breath. And bringing your attention to your eyes. You might notice that there's slight coloring or light that you can experience through your eyes. Are there any images that come across your eyes? What are you noticing? And then bringing attention to your body. Where are the points of contact in the chair? And noticing your breath. So bringing awareness to your breath. Noticing the in-breath and the out. And just for another minute, breathe. And a thought might flicker, one of those to-do list points. Just bring your attention back to the breath. As you have learned, have experienced the settling with your breath, we're going to move back out, back into the room where you are with your attention gradually expanding from your breath to your body, awareness of your experience in the room. Noting some thoughts that are coming back into your experience as you are listening to me bring you back. Gradually opening your eyes. So that was a 3-minute breathing practice in which we started with all the things that were probably kind of up here in your head. The thoughts, the things you brought. For example, you can do this if you're just trying to take a break before you need to move on to something. Whether it's something that's troubling you or just something that's a shift. So let's say something's kind of caught your attention and it's really rattling around in your brain. You're starting up here with a whole range of thoughts. You then slowly narrow your attention to a very simple point, bringing all your awareness to your body, what's happening through all your senses, and then bring it to a very narrow point of attention, focusing on the breath for just a short period of time. That settles down, and then back out to what you're doing in the moment. So what was that like, just for a few minutes, to just take a moment to breathe? Did you feel a little different from when you started than afterwards? Just a little bit, just a short distance.
Withdrawn. It's like you were away from where you really were. You were withdrawn within yourself.
Within yourself. So you noticed you were in your body, bringing your attention to here rather than.
And that's
Mhm. Did it? That feels good, doesn't it? Yeah. I think about how many times I miss an opportunity to do this. It's 3 minutes for that simple note. So what this is just one example of a type of meditation practice that you can explore. There are many, many different ways that you can learn meditation. I think that I think it's helpful to find a teacher and find a practice that works for you. I've mentioned on the back of that sheet, let's see, some resources. There are many that you can explore, but the two that I've just mentioned here are the ones that were related to the study. So that's why I've mentioned Vicki Kennedy Overfelt is someone who offers mindfulness-based stress reduction. She's a wonderful teacher. And I would recommend you contact Vicki if you'd like to learn that type of meditation. And then Shirley Ray, who was the teacher for this course, and the participants loved Shirley. She teaches at the Inner Light Meditation Center, or the Inner Light Center. And those are just two examples of some teachers. I bet Dr. Drescher might also have some other ideas of do you know who teaches TM here, Stuart?
The center is this.
So the Transcendental Meditation is another form of meditation that has been, is the one that Dr. Drescher was mentioning, that Herbert Benson and his colleagues at Harvard use for the relaxation response. All of these kinds of meditation approaches can be very, very helpful. So you can explore what works for you. And there's lots of books and tapes, but I think it's very helpful to have a regular practice with someone who can help you. It keeps you on your toes and keeps you coming back to it. So those are just two that I would suggest that you can explore. I also bring up two people who I know who teach Yoga Nidra, which is a type of meditation that's really based in the body. And the reason I think I'm recommending it is that for people who have chronic pain and fibromyalgia, this type of meditation is done lying down in a very comfortable way. And Scott Moore and Charlotte Bell are two of the practitioners that I'm aware of who teach Yoga Nidra, and it's a very, very comfortable form of meditation that's very focused on bodily awareness. So those are a couple other recommendations. And then I just listed a few books and tapes that that might be worth exploring. I should have put down the one that I'm forgetting. Yeah. Tell me again. That's How to Meditate by, what's her name? The one who teaches.
It's clinically sick, right?
Yes. Dr. Patricia Carrington. That's a tape, a book and tape.
What's the name of it?
It's the Clinically Standardized Meditation Kit, I think. And that,
It's known by the acronym CSM. If you go to Amazon.com, they have it listed under the author's name, Dr. Patricia Carrington. The CSM. The CSM tool. Is it the toolkit? No, it's meditation kit, I think, is the name of it.
It's great.
She did thorough research on several different forms of meditation and was able to determine what are the key ingredients that are responsible for the benefits. Put it together in a self-instruction format, so there's a combination of some CDs and a workbook that work together. And I've used this in a class that I taught at the university for 5 years. About 2,000 people experience this technique, and I use it in my private practice. And it's very successful.
What is her name?
Dr. Patricia Carrington. Carrington, a psychologist at Princeton University.
Stuart, do you think it's a good idea to work with a teacher?
I think that working with a teacher is one of the differences between people who start and quit versus people who continue. This is for a couple of reasons. One is that I used to have a sign in my office that said, meditation is not what you think. It was an intentional double entendre. Because it is such a simple technique, and it is so consistently misunderstood. We keep wanting to introduce complications and wisdom and ideas, and improvements that actually rob it of its value. And a teacher is able to keep bringing us back into the systematic teaching process and to dispel the misunderstandings. It's great to have somebody to turn to when you're confused or lacking information, and to get an answer that supports further practice.
That's the answer I wanted. Especially the simple part. So any other questions or thoughts about, yeah.
I have one that I find is really effective for me. For me, I find that if I'm doing it to get better or something like that, like meditation or anything really, eating better, exercise, I really get outside of myself. So every time I do it, before I do it, I say, what is this doing for me? Why do I want to do this? And what part is it? Why do I choose this? Why do I choose to do this? And I really go within myself to bring it to, I'm choosing to do this, and I want to do this. And the benefits aren't what is important. The choice that I want to do it is what's important.
Oh, that's nice. Very nice. Yeah. It sounds like a wonderful way of giving yourself, I deserve this. I'm taking care of myself, and this is a nice thing for myself. Yeah. Rather than I have to do this, or.
But then you won't.
It's funny how that works, doesn't it? I happen to identify with the doing also. I can certainly identify with that. And I've been trying very hard to shift that around. And I noticed about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was really, really busy. And it was on a day that I didn't see clients. And so I started playing guitar, and I was so excited about learning to play guitar, and I was doing some writing. I got halfway through the day and, oh, I have to do my guitar lesson and I have to do that writing. And then I mean, this was a day of all these glorious activities that I had put out for myself. And I had found myself moving into that old pattern of, these were things that to do. And as opposed to this, oh, glorious day, I have all these wonderful activities. But it's so easy to shift, even with things we love to do, into a pattern of thought. And that's what this particular tool is very helpful at doing, is that you can begin to kind of laugh at yourself and our capacity to move right back into that old groove. Yeah.
I find it really, really hard to give myself permission
Oh,
to
yeah.
do what's good for me. I'm going to do it as soon as I get this done.
Oh, I know.
Then
I know. Yeah, it really needs to be right at the top of the list. Yeah, especially.
If you need permission, just give me a call.
Yeah.
Essentially, all are creatures of habit. Having a teacher will kind of help us to start a new habit of doing the right thing.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the habit, because one of the things that I mentioned, Pema Chodron, her work with meditation and with lots of beautiful books that you might want to check into. But one of the things Pema Chodron says is that you want to strengthen the new experience of being able to, for example, just come back to the breath or come back to a word, a mantra. You want to strengthen that habit rather than strengthening your old tendency to not take care of yourself, or to whatever our old habits are, that each time we fall back on putting ourselves at the bottom of the list, for example, if that's a habit, that we're strengthening that rather than strengthening the capacity to take care of ourselves in a different way. I like that idea that we're actually building the muscle to do a new pattern, a new habit, as opposed to, using the old ones. Yeah.
How, if any way, does hypnosis work with this, or is it totally separate? Or is this self-hypnosis that you're doing?
That's can you answer that question?
So glad Stuart's
It's completely different. Hypnosis produces some form of trance in which our attention is funneled or focused, but it's actually a channeling of the attention. Now, in meditation, we actually focus on a mantra or a process, but it's a different quality of mind. So mind becomes more open, spacious, and encompassing, as opposed to a hypnosis experience. For anybody who has experienced both, they'll give you a very definitive answer that they're very different.
All right, now here's the last part of this. I want you to pull out the journey. And I'm going to read it to you. I think we should all memorize this poem. One of the things I like about some of the meditation courses I've attended or learning is that when you're meditating, sometimes the course leader will read a wonderful poem. So you might want to close your eyes when I read this to you. But it helps you focus on the words. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried. But you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do, though the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations, though their melancholy was terrible. It was already late enough and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voices behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice. There was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life you could save. That's Mary Oliver. She gets it. I hope this entices you into the thought that you might want to explore meditation. If you're interested, I also I'll probably send a note around. I'll be starting probably in the next couple months a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy course, and it's about 8 to 10 weeks, very similar to this. I'm doing this with a colleague of mine and Stuart's, and Linnea's Dan Sternberg, but we'll be working, it teaches meditation and also cognitive therapy issues, and it's particularly focused on people who have had to struggle with depression. And I know that has come up for many people who have struggled with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. So if you're interested, I'll let you know, and you could give me a call. Why don't I'll let you know. Program director that you are. Okay, I'll just let you know, and you have on that, my stationery has my telephone number and contact information. So if you have any questions, you can email or contact me there too. Any other last questions or thoughts or? Yeah. Pema Chodron. It's an interesting name, Pemachhodron, and I think I put one of her books on there. Yeah, When Things Fall Apart. She has lots of different books. I just find her work, because she focuses on compassion in such a beautiful way. But she has lots of different books. Which one?
Great.
Oh, Breakthrough Pain. Yeah, that Shinzen Young. Yeah, he's really great. That's a particularly the Shinzen Young. It has a good audio tape with it. So many of these, like for example, Jon Kabat-Zinn has many books, and I have lots of books up here. I forgot to mention that if you want to come up and look, if you're curious. Jon Kabat-Zinn has lots of meditation tapes. I brought one with me to show you. Shinzen Young has lots of tapes along with his books. The Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein is a tape. The Carrington book is a book and tape. Yoga Nidra is a book and tape. And Adyashanti has many different books and tapes. So all of these, and Pema Chodron, so all of them, you have different ways of learning if you like to learn auditorily as well as reading. So.
Do you feel that the tapes help an awful lot?
Boy, I love tapes personally. But I'm a real auditory learner, and I like going to classes. So, but the tapes help me. It helps keep me kind of focused sometimes when I tend to kind of lose sight of what I want to do. I've been meditating for a long time, so I don't find that very challenging anymore to sit and without a tape. But for many people, when we're starting out the meditation classes, they listen to tapes to help learn, and then gradually take the tapes away. It's a really good way to kind of keep focused. Pardon?
They've developed a new habit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I love listening to tapes because it helps me learn a new way. So you're welcome to come explore some of those books and tapes. And thank you for being here tonight. I was really looking forward to talking with you all because it was very exciting to do this research and hard work. I really appreciated the chance to learn a lot more. It's helped me with my clients who are struggling with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, and it was very encouraging to see these changes, very encouraging.